Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Hello, you're listening to Times Radio with me, Ed Vaizey, and it's a very good Friday evening to you. We've got so much coming up on the show between now and 10 o'clock. The usual eclectic array of guests and stories for you, covering a host of cultural delights. This hour, I'm going to be talking to John Walsh, the writer, about cult films. He's written a huge doorstopper about Conan the Barbarian and also about the Wickerman. Please do feel free to text us on 87222. Start it with the word Times. As we're talking to John Walsh about cult movies, I want to know what your favourite cult movie is. The more obscure or absurd, the better.
This is Times Radio.
It's Ed Vaizey on Times Radio. Welcome back to the show. We're going to be talking to John Walsh in just a moment about cult movies. He's written a book about Conan the Barbarian, The Wicker Man, and Doctor Who. But this is your show, so let's start with your cult movie. Galaxy Quest has come in from Jeff. Silly beyond belief. Jeff also, he's got a bit between his teeth. My other favourite is Goodbye Lenin. Great irony, and the soundtrack by Yang Tiersen Jeff, and we're going to try and find that soundtrack for you. Francisca in Hampshire. My favourite film is Thoroughly Modern Millie, a musical from 1968 starring Julie Andrews, set in the 1920s. Little girl fell in love, blah, blah, blah. I even named my first dog after Julie's character. Looking back, I didn't realise the film was about sex trafficking. I didn't know that. Ron... Oh, we're playing. See how good we are on this show? Kelly's Heroes, endorsed by Ron from Hertfordshire. Somebody's asking, does Mean Girls count as a film? That can be a sub-thread. Is Mean Girls a cult film? And also, good evening from your loyal listeners. Yes, we do have loyal listeners on this show who always text in. We haven't heard from Alistair. We haven't heard from Susie G or Alistair yet, but no doubt we will during the course of the evening. Anyway, this is Thoroughly Modern Millie, but more importantly, this is John Walsh. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ed. It's good to be here.
You are a filmmaker and an author. You've written 3 kind of books about films.
6 actually, but they're just the 3 that we've sent. So.
Okay.
Yep.
And Conan the Barbarian. Tell us about this film. This has launched Arnold Schwarzenegger's career.
It did pretty much, yes. So he'd been in some small theatrical films before, but this was the one that gave him a world platform. And of course, it was fascinating because it had a massive budget, and yet he couldn't act. And many of the lines of dialogue were taken away from him and given to other people because he looked the part, he couldn't remember the lines, and he couldn't really deliver them with any conviction either.
Well, let's hear Arnold Schwarzenegger and whether he could deliver these lines, or maybe there was somebody else that's delivering them.
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. That is good.
Did Arnold Schwarzenegger say the lamentation of the women?
He did, but a lot of that was re-looped or redubbed later. So a lot of the location dialogue, which was in place for the other actors, had to be re-looped for Arnie to give him a better performance. So he was asked to come back in and with director John Milius try to act it better through voice dubbing.
I've just worked out that I was 15 when this film came out, and the cover, which is Conan with his sword erect and a very fetching lady kneeling down in front of him, both of them looking outwards, is seared in my memory. I suspect my age is part of the reason. But this is a very iconic sort of drawing on the front of your book, which is part of the kind of... Is it part of the cult of Conan the Barbarian, the drawings, the sort of comic-style drawings?
I think it is, because Robert E. Howard, who created the original stories, most people remembered them as comic strip form. So people think of him as a comic strip sort of superhero or anti-hero. But really the film itself went against the grain because it was an X certificate when it came out.
Oh, was it?
Yes, it was, yeah. So if you'd seen it in the cinema, then you'd needed to have been 18 or over. And it was incredibly violent. So Universal Pictures, who were behind the picture, and Dino De Laurentiis, the famous Italian film mogul, they were very worried. And when they did previews of the film, they thought that they didn't have a hit on their hands. So they were quite mystified when it was a big success.
So it was a big success. It wasn't
Great
one of these
success.
that's... And who was his blonde sidekick, who I've just seen a photograph of?
Oh, Sandel Bergman, she's in there as well.
And who is she? What happened to her?
She appeared in other films.
She didn't become governor of California, for example?
She didn't, no, not yet. Not yet, I think we'd have to say. But she was in Red Sonja, if you remember that film.
No.
Now that probably is a cult film, because I might have to take you to task on your definition of what you think a cult film is.
I think we don't want to digress too much, but I think it's a kind of one that is a slow burn.
Possibly, yes. So generally films that are released but are unsuccessful on their initial release and then find an audience later on, either through VHS or through sort of midnight screenings. And The Wicker Man's a good example of that. Complete box office disaster when it came out in 1973. Cost £500,000 to shoot, which is a fairly decent budget. Another £150,000 was spent on prints and advertising. The prints were the films in the cinema. And it made £75,000 at the box office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because I actually know the son of the director of The Wicker Man.
Oh, right. Robin Hardy's son, yes.
Yeah, Justin Hardy, who made a few films, one of which starred Michael Gove. Which I think if you have a film with Michael Gove in it, that automatically qualifies as cult status. But tell us about The Wicker Man, because that is a proper cult movie, because everyone has a view about The Wicker Man. It's kind of part of your identity as a film lover.
They do, yeah. So when you think about Conan, that was Schwarzenegger's kind of starting point, and his career grew from that film. Nobody's career grew from The Wicker Man. All of the people who were on that picture, Edward Woodward, Christopher Lee, Britt Eklund, they went on to do other films, but it wasn't a launch pad for anyone. The director was unsuccessful pretty much in his professional life, working on other pictures. Anthony Schaefer, the well-known screenwriter.
Because it cost Robin Hardy a lot of money, didn't it? Didn't he lose a lot of money on it?
The money was put into it by British Lion Films. So British Lion actually lost the money.
Yeah.
So Michael Dealey and Barry Spikings, who ran British Lion, they were the ones who kind of lost the money on that.
Let's hear a little extract from The Wicker Man to remind our listeners.
I have come here from the mainland to investigate the disappearance of a young girl, Rowan Morrison. That's her name? You know her?
No, I've never seen her before.
You suspect foul play?
I suspect murder.
We don't commit murder up here. We're a deeply religious people.
Yes, so there you are. So people lost money on it, but when did it start to sort of emerge as a film that people kind of put up there?
So it was reissued in America, and they found some of the missing footage that was cut from the original UK release. And so slowly in midnight screenings, that's when people started to find a kind of a place for it. And it was a small distributor, Abraxas, who released this in America. And then it had a VHS release. And the fan base just built over the years. So when you come to today, there's been this very expensive book by Tyson Books. And Studio Canal, who owns the British Films Library, British Lion Films Library, they've released a 4K version of it. So it's about £60 if you were to buy the box set of all three versions of The Wicker Man in its different
and they've done their own book alongside...
No, my book is an officially licensed one that accompanies, as it were, that 4K release.
And your book is very expensive?
It's quite expensive, yeah. It's £30, £35. You know.
But it's that you've thrown everything at it. It's glossy.
Oh, yeah, it's a big, glossy, expensive book.
And when you do a book like The Wicker Man, I mean, did you go... I don't know when you wrote it, but in terms of Christopher Lee and some of the stars, were you able to talk to some of them?
Yeah, so everyone who's alive I spoke to. Britt Eklund did her first interview with me after nearly sort of 20 or 30 years about The Wicker Man, because she was very unhappy with her portrayal and the way she was treated.
Oh, yes, well, tell us about that, because I was very intrigued as to how these stars kind of felt about the movie.
Well, she was upset for two reasons. The main one was because she was redubbed by another actress. Because it was felt that her accent wasn't in keeping with the kind of local Scottish community. But actually, I think they could have probably kept her accent, because the film has quite a sort of a weird, otherworldly feel. And I think
exactly.
it would have rather suited it.
Yeah.
That was the first reason she was angry. The second reason was Robin Hardy and the film's screenwriter Anthony Schaefer promised that she wouldn't be shown nude fully in the film from below the waist, and she wasn't. But they got somebody else in to body double her, somebody who she felt wasn't a flattering image of her from behind, and they sort of plonked a blonde wig on her.
Had she been in a Bond film before or after Wicker Man?
After The Wicker Man, her and Christopher Lee both went to The Man with the Golden Gun.
Oh, right. So it didn't damage their career in any shape or form. People probably didn't even know the film existed.
No, exactly. You know, The Wickerman didn't really grow in popularity in sort of the VHS revolution in the mid-'80s.
I think the other definition of a cult movie for me would be sort of terribly bad special effects.
I think that's harsh, because if you think of a film like Flash Gordon, I wrote the official story of the 1980 film Flash Gordon.
Right.
That has special effects that are of its day. But then most films, if you look back at special effects, even at the original Star Wars, some of those are of its time.
Yeah.
But I think certainly films have a kind of unique look and feel. But if they've been ignored by audiences at the time and have been rediscovered, people feel they're personal to them.
But I mean, you've written this book about Doctor Who and the Daleks. I mean, Doctor Who is sort of famous for having sort of pretty ropey special effects. I mean, we all love the BBC. We had a chat about I, Claudius a few weeks ago, and how they basically had to do the crowd noise, and every set was a large sheet because they had no budget. It's similar with Doctor Who. I mean, they had to use their imagination because they didn't have the money.
Absolutely, you know, but when Doctor Who went into the cinema with Peter Cushing, it was the first time they had real sets, bigger Daleks, and they were in colour as well. So it did look more like a kind of a Doctor No film.
Let's hear a bit of Doctor Who.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Doctor Who, and this is my time and space machine, TARDIS. Off we go. It is capable of taking us to any age, on any planet, in any universe. Rather exciting, isn't it? Daleks! You will be exterminated!
So we're talking about your book, The Official Story of the Films of Doctor Who. I'd forgotten there were films.
Yes, 2 feature films. There was going to be 3. At the back of the book, we talk about what happened to film number 3. But they're amazing. I mean, you know, they've lasted. And they've had a 4K restoration as well by Studio Canal. They look resplendent. And it's been a real money spinner for everyone involved. I mean, the book's been a great success.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I gather that the Doctor Who book that you published, which you spent a lot of time trying to persuade the publishers that there would be a market for it, and on day one it sold out.
That's right. In Amazon in the UK, completely sold out on day one because of pre-orders. So it was very satisfying. But there's a great market for Doctor Who. All of the old television series are being reissued on Blu-ray, even though they're not high-definition programmes. They're being upscaled, and they're selling like hotcakes.
And presumably the BBC still makes quite a lot of money selling Doctor Who around the world. I mean, was Doctor Who kind of popular in other countries? I mean, did the Doctor Who films do well in American box office or anything like that?
And the first one did. The second one less so. But now they sell very well. And it's secondary sales. It's for television and it's for DVD, Blu-ray and 4K. But the Doctor Who television series is constantly sold because it's been made quite cheaply by a state broadcaster. They can afford to sell it for what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. And what have you got in the pipeline coming up for your next cult movie?
I'm not sure. There's a few things in the pipeline. You know, one of the issues is finding the rights and making sure it's something that people want, because sometimes unsuccessful films make successful books. So if you think of films that we grew up with, like Tron, box office flop, Blade Runner, box office flop.
Oh, but Blade Runner is a proper cult movie. Everyone loves Blade Runner now.
And it's a great definition of a cult movie.
Blade Runner, the director's cut, I mean, they milk it for all it's worth.
And it's brilliant special effects, 40 years old, but the effects, you'd have to admit, are absolutely spot on.
And at the risk of taking Coles to Newcastle, John Walsh, what is your favourite cult movie?
I think it's Terry Gilliam's Brazil.
Oh, interesting. Now, why that?
Well, it was a take on George Orwell's 1984, and I'd seen 1984, the film with John Hurt, and it was quite dry and very serious and a great film. But Brazil is a great take on it, and originally it was going to be called 1984 and a half, but they couldn't agree that with the Orwell estate. And I think it's a great film. If you haven't seen Terry Gilliam's Brazil, track it down.
I think I have seen it, and didn't it go wildly over budget? I imagine wasn't the making of Brazil an unbelievably torturous process?
It often is. Terry Gilliam's films tend to be quite outrageous. We think of The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Brazil had various cuts. There was arguments with the studio about releasing the picture, and it's just a great film. It's set at Christmas. People forget Brazil is a Christmas movie.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Well, John Walsh, thank you so much for coming into the studio. This is John Walsh, Doctor Who and the Daleks, holding up to my millions of viewers on YouTube. There you are. Conan the Barbarian, here you are. 2 luxurious and beautiful books. And John Walsh, you've been such a good guest, you are forgiven with the fact that you have made personal dedications in these books to my producer, Tim, rather than to me. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We've got more of your cult shows coming in. We've still got John Walsh in the studio. He might give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down as I read them.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.